The African sun blazed down like a furnace on the Serengeti plains. Heat waves shimmered across the golden grassland, making the distant acacia trees look like they were dancing in the air. Near a small watering hole, surrounded by dried mud cracks, stood one of nature's most powerful predators. His name was Simba, and he was a lion in his absolute prime. At 12 years old, he had ruled this territory for nearly 8 years. His mane was thick and black, draping down his shoulders like a cloak made for a king. Deep scars crisscrossed his face and body, each one telling a story of battles won, rivals defeated, and a life lived at the very edge of survival. Simba had killed more buffalo than most lions ever see in their entire lives. He knew their habits, their weaknesses, where they gathered, and when they were most vulnerable. He had perfected his hunting technique over hundreds of kills. The crouch, the sprint, the perfect angle of attack. Everything about him screamed confidence and power. The other lions in the region feared him. Hyena clans would scatter at the sound of his roar. Leopards abandoned their kills when they caught his scent on the wind. Even the buffalo herds knew to give him extra space when he moved among them. But confidence can sometimes blur the line between bravery and arrogance. And that's exactly what was about to happen on this scorching afternoon. Simba hadn't eaten in 3 days. Not because he was unable to hunt, but because he had been focused on defending his territory from rival males. The boundaries of his kingdom stretched across nearly 150 square kilometers of prime hunting ground. That meant constant patrols, endless roaring, and occasional fights with other ambitious males who thought they could steal what he had built. The hunger was starting to affect his thinking, making him more aggressive, more willing to take risks. His ribs were starting to show beneath his tan fur, and his eyes had that focused intensity that only comes when a predator truly needs to eat. That morning, his scouts had spotted something incredible. A massive buffalo bull, probably weighing close to 2,000 pounds, had separated from the main herd. The animal was moving slowly, favoring his left front leg, clearly injured from something. Maybe a previous encounter with a lion, maybe a fight with another bull, or maybe just age finally catching up with him. Whatever the reason, here was an opportunity that Simba hadn't seen in months. A massive buffalo moving alone and weak. Under normal circumstances, Simba would have approached this situation with caution. Healthy adult buffalo were incredibly dangerous. Their horns could gore a lion from shoulder to hip with a single toss. Their powerful hooves could break bones. A charging buffalo was basically a 1-ton missile with sharp points. Even Simba, as powerful as he was, treated healthy buffalo with respect. That's why most male lions avoided them entirely. They would rather hunt zebra or wildebeest, prey that was less likely to kill them. But this buffalo seemed different. This buffalo seemed vulnerable. Simba watched from a distance as the animal moved toward the watering hole. The limp was obvious now. The buffalo was clearly in pain, moving slower than a healthy animal should move. The lion's stomach rumbled with hunger. 3 days without food. 3 days of only drinking water and blood from old kills that other predators had abandoned. He needed to eat, and his body was reminding him constantly that it was time to hunt. The buffalo reached the water's edge and began to drink. Its massive head lowered, its attention focused entirely on the water. For just a few seconds, it would be vulnerable. That was all Simba needed. He had calculated this moment hundreds of times before. The angle, the distance, the speed required. Everything had worked before. Everything would work now. Simba moved into position with the grace and silence that only an apex predator possesses. He kept his body low, his massive frame somehow compact and invisible against the grass. The other lions in his pride were resting somewhere to the east, probably sleeping through the heat of the day like most smart predators. He was hunting alone today, which meant the entire kill would be his. Every muscle in his body tensed with anticipation. The hunger drove him forward, pushing aside the small voice of caution that had kept him alive for 12 years. The buffalo's back leg twitched as it drank. The animal was definitely injured, probably in pain, probably not at full strength. Simba crouched lower, his tail twitching, his breathing controlled and steady. He had done this 1,000 times before. He knew exactly how this would play out. The charge, the tackle, the final moments when prey became food. This was the natural order. This was what he was born to do. Everything felt right. The wind was blowing in the right direction, carrying his scent away from the buffalo. The sun was at his back, making him harder to see. The buffalo was distracted, focused entirely on quenching its thirst. The distance was maybe 30 meters. That was nothing. His powerful hind legs could cover that ground in seconds, building up enough momentum to knock the buffalo down. Simba made his decision. He exploded from the grass like a furry rocket. His massive body was impossibly fast for something that weighed over 400 pounds. The earth seemed to shake with his charging footsteps. His roar split the air, a sound so deep and powerful that it made the birds scatter from the nearby trees. Every ounce of confidence that Simba possessed was channeled into this attack. He was the king of this territory. He was the strongest predator for 100 kilometers in any direction. This was his meal, his kill, his victory. The buffalo had maybe 2 seconds to react. In those 2 seconds, everything changed. The injured animal's head snapped up. Its eyes, which had been peaceful and calm a moment before, suddenly burned with something primal and ancient. The buffalo wasn't just weak. The buffalo wasn't just vulnerable. The buffalo was angry. Its injury had made it mean, made it desperate, made it willing to fight rather than run. And somewhere in its massive brain, an instinct older than memory was awakening. The instinct to survive at any cost. The buffalo didn't try to escape. It didn't try to run away from the charging lion. Instead, it did something that most prey animals never do. It turned to face the threat directly. Simba was maybe 5 meters away now, moving at full speed, completely committed to the attack. There was no way to stop his charge, no way to change direction. His weight, his momentum, his speed, all combined into a physical reality that he couldn't control anymore. He was like a boulder rolling down a mountain, unstoppable and absolutely committed to his path. The buffalo lowered its head. What happened in the next second would change Simba's entire life. The massive buffalo bull, moving with surprising speed for such a large animal, charged directly at the charging lion. 2 forces of nature on a collision course. 2 apex predators about to meet in the middle of the African plain. The impact when they collided was tremendous. The sound echoed across the grassland, a sickening crack that made every other animal within a mile freeze in fear. But it wasn't the buffalo that made the sound of pain. Simba felt something hit his chest with the force of a sledgehammer. The air was driven from his lungs in one explosive gasp. His vision tilted and spun as his body flew backward through the air. For a moment, he was weightless, suspended between the ground and the sky. Then he crashed down hard on his back, the wind completely knocked out of him. For several seconds, Simba couldn't breathe. He couldn't think. He couldn't do anything except lie there in the dust and try to remember how to pull air into his lungs. His mind was spinning, confused, unable to process what had just happened. He was the hunter. He was the king. He was the apex predator. Nothing was supposed to hit him like that. Nothing was supposed to make him fly through the air like a cub. The buffalo stood over him, breathing hard, its massive chest heaving with exertion and adrenaline. The animal had taken the full force of a charging lion and had survived. More than survived. Had won the initial exchange. The buffalo's horn had caught Simba directly in the sternum, between the front legs, right where the lion's heart was protected only by muscle and fur and bone. Simba finally managed to pull in a breath. It hurt. Everything hurt. He rolled onto his side, still gasping, still trying to understand what had gone wrong. This wasn't how it was supposed to go. He had charged hundreds of times before. He had attacked buffalo before, successful attacks where the prey had died and he had eaten. But this buffalo was different. This buffalo wasn't playing by the rules that Simba had learned over 12 years of hunting. The buffalo snorted and pawed the ground. Its hooves churned up clouds of dust. The animal was ready to charge again. Simba realized with a sinking feeling in his stomach that he had made a terrible mistake. His confidence had blinded him. His hunger had made him careless. His assumption that an injured buffalo would be easy prey had almost gotten him killed. He needed to get away from this animal. He needed to retreat and reassess. But his pride was wounded now. His ego was damaged. He was the king, and kings don't run away from prey. Simba struggled to his feet, his muscles protesting with pain. His chest felt like someone had placed a boulder on top of it. Breathing was difficult. Moving was even more difficult. But he stood up anyway, facing the buffalo, his eyes still burning with the same confidence that had gotten him into this situation. The buffalo scraped its front hoof against the ground. A clear warning, a challenge. The animal was telling Simba that if he wanted another exchange, he was welcome to try. What Simba did next would determine whether this story ended with him returning to his pride to tell of an unusual hunt, or whether the buzzards would have something to eat before the sun set. Simba stood there, breathing heavily, his massive chest rising and falling with effort. The pain in his sternum was like a burning coal buried deep in his body. Every breath sent sharp needles through his ribs. He could taste blood in his mouth. Whether it was his own blood or the buffalo's, he couldn't tell. His vision was still a little blurry from the impact, but it was clearing with each passing second. The adrenaline in his system was pushing aside the pain, flooding his body with chemicals that made him feel like his muscles were vibrating just beneath his skin. The buffalo was waiting. It wasn't running away. It wasn't trying to rejoin its herd. It was standing its ground, ready for round two, ready to defend itself with everything it had. Simba recognized something in the buffalo's posture that he didn't often see in prey animals. He recognized determination. He recognized the will to survive at any cost. This buffalo had decided that it would rather fight and possibly die than run and definitely die. The lion's pride had taught him many things over the years. His mother had taught him how to hunt. His father had taught him how to fight other males. The territory itself had taught him how to survive. But there was one lesson that Simba seemed to have forgotten in his years of dominance. Sometimes the prey fights back harder than you expect. Sometimes the animal you think is weak is actually stronger than you realized. Simba's options were becoming clear. He could attempt another charge, trying a different angle, trying to use his superior speed and agility to find an opening that the buffalo's horns could undefend. He could circle and wait for another opportunity, moving around the buffalo until he spotted a weakness. Or he could walk away. He could admit that this particular buffalo was more trouble than it was worth and move on to find easier prey. His hunger made the decision for him. The lion roared again, a sound that was supposed to sound confident and powerful, but came out slightly strained because of the pain in his chest. He began to circle the buffalo, moving in a wide arc, his eyes locked on every movement the animal made. The buffalo turned to keep him in view, rotating its body slowly, its massive horns always pointed in Simba's direction. The two predators were locked in a deadly dance, each one waiting for the other to make a mistake. Simba noticed something as he circled. The buffalo's injured leg was becoming more apparent now. With each rotation, the animal seemed to be putting slightly less weight on the left front leg. The limp was definitely getting worse. Maybe the impact with the lion had aggravated the injury. Maybe the adrenaline was wearing off and the pain was returning. Whatever the reason, the buffalo was becoming slightly less mobile with each passing moment. This was Simba's chance. He continued, circling, watching, waiting, his hunter's mind analyzing the situation like a chess player studying a board. The buffalo was definitely slower on the right side. The animal was having trouble pivoting quickly in that direction. If Simba could attack from the right, if he could come in from the buffalo's weaker side, then maybe he could find an opening that the horns couldn't protect. The lion tensed his muscles. He was preparing for another charge. This time would be different. This time he would use his intelligence instead of just his strength. This time he would take advantage of the buffalo's weakness instead of attacking head-on. But the buffalo was also preparing. The animal had been through this before, probably many times in its life. Wild buffalo fought constantly with lions and hyenas and wild dogs. This wasn't the first time it had been attacked. The animal had survived this long because it knew how to fight, and it knew that the lion was about to charge again. What happened next occurred so fast that if someone had been filming it, they would have needed to slow down the video to see all the details. Simba launched himself forward with explosive power. His injured chest screamed in protest, but he pushed through the pain. His powerful legs drove him forward in a straight line toward the buffalo's left side. The buffalo, anticipating the charge, pivoted to meet the threat head-on, but the pivot was slightly slow on that injured leg. Just slightly, just enough to matter. Simba adjusted his trajectory in mid-charge, reading the buffalo's movement like he had done 1,000 times before. He was aiming now for the buffalo's shoulder instead of the front. It was a different angle of attack, one that the horn couldn't defend as easily. The lion's claws extended, ready to rake across muscle and fur and skin. His teeth were bared, ready to find a grip and hold on. They collided again, but this time with less force because Simba had adjusted his angle. The buffalo's horn caught the lion on the left side of the chest, but not straight on. The impact was still tremendous, still painful, But this time, Simba managed to stay on his feet. His claws found purchase on the buffalo's shoulder, digging in deep, drawing blood. The animal let out a bellow of pain and anger. It was the sound of a creature that had been wounded, that had been hurt by this predator. The buffalo spun, trying to throw the lion off its back, trying to use its horns to reach the attacker who was now clinging to its body. This was the moment that Simba had been waiting for. This was his opportunity. He pulled himself higher on the buffalo's back, crawling up the animal's body, getting closer to the neck where the killing bite would end this battle. But the buffalo was far from finished. The animal reared up on its hind legs, lifting its front hooves off the ground. Simba felt himself slipping, felt gravity pulling him backward, felt his grip weakening. He dug his claws in deeper, trying to hold on, but it was like trying to grip a cliff face during an earthquake. Everything was moving, shifting, throwing him around. When the buffalo came back down, it came down hard. The impact, when its hooves hit the ground, sent a shockwave through its entire body. Simba was thrown off like a rag doll. He flew through the air again, but this time he had some control. He twisted his body mid-fall and landed on his side instead of his back. It was better than the first time, but it still hurt like nothing he had ever experienced before. Simba lay in the dust, his breathing ragged and painful. His vision was swimming. His entire body felt like it had been put through a grinder. The buffalo was standing maybe 5 meters away, also breathing heavily, also clearly injured from the encounter. Both animals were bleeding, both animals were exhausted. Both animals had discovered that this was not going to be an easy victory. The lion tried to stand up. His legs felt weak, unreliable, like they didn't quite want to hold his weight. He had never felt like this before, even after fighting other lions, even after battles that had left him scarred and bleeding. He had never felt quite this defeated, this exhausted, this close to collapse. The buffalo watched him with eyes that burned with intelligence and pain. The animal took a step backward, and then another. It was moving slowly, still favoring that injured leg, but it was moving away from the lion. The buffalo had had enough. The animal had decided that killing this lion, even if it was possible, wasn't worth the effort. The buffalo was choosing to survive rather than fight until one of them was dead. Simba watched the buffalo limp away across the grassland. He watched it disappear into the tall grass in the distance. He watched the only meal he had spotted in 3 days' walk away from him. And for the first time in his life as a dominant predator, Simba felt something that he had never felt before. He felt humility. He felt the understanding that no matter how strong you are, no matter how confident you are, sometimes the prey is just too dangerous. Sometimes you pick a fight that you can't win. Sometimes your confidence blinds you to the reality of the situation. The lion lay there in the dust for a long time. The sun continued its arc across the sky. The shadows grew longer as afternoon turned toward evening. Vultures began to circle overhead, sensing that an animal was injured and possibly dying. Hyenas in the distance began their laughing calls, wondering if there might be a meal for them if the lion couldn't get up. But Simba was not dying. He was injured. Yes, he was exhausted. Yes, he was humiliated. Absolutely. But he was not dying. His breathing became more controlled. The pain, while still intense, began to fade into the background as his body adjusted to it. It took him nearly half an hour to stand up. It took him even longer to start walking. He moved slowly away from the watering hole, away from the site of his defeat, away from the place where he had learned a lesson that he would never forget. His pride was resting somewhere to the east. They would be expecting him to return with news of a kill. Instead, he would return with wounds and a story about the day that his confidence had nearly gotten him killed. The lionesses would see his injuries and understand immediately what had happened. They would understand that even the strongest predator in the territory could be humbled by prey that refused to be easy prey. As Simba limped back toward his pride, leaving a trail of blood in the dust behind him, something inside him had changed. The arrogance was gone. The blind confidence had been replaced by something more valuable: experience, respect. There are no certainties. There are only the constant battles, the constant struggles, and the understanding that you could lose if you weren't careful. The buffalo had taught him a lesson that his mother never could have taught him. The buffalo had shown him that being king doesn't mean you always win. The buffalo had proved that sometimes the prey fights back harder than anyone expects. And Simba would carry the scars from this encounter for the rest of his life. Every time he looked down at his chest and saw those marks, every time he felt the pain in his ribs on cold mornings, he would remember the day that a single buffalo had shattered his plan and changed his understanding of what it meant to be an apex predator in the African wilderness. The sun was beginning its descent toward the horizon when Simba finally reached the acacia grove, where his pride was resting. The shadows beneath the trees were deep and dark, providing relief from the intense heat of the day. The lionesses were sprawled out across the ground in various states of relaxation. Some were grooming each other, their rough tongues moving gently across fur and skin. Others were sleeping, their massive bodies completely still, their breathing slow and steady. Cubs tumbled around the area, wrestling with each other, practicing the moves they would need when they became hunters themselves. All of that activity stopped the moment Simba emerged from the tall grass. The first lioness to notice him was Zara, the oldest female in the pride. She had been with Simba for 5 years, longer than any of the others. She had seen him hunt successfully, countless times. She had seen him defeat rival males. She had seen him in his complete power and dominance, but she had never seen him look like this. Her ears perked up immediately, and she rose to her feet with an urgency that made the other lionesses turn their heads to look. What they saw made them all freeze. Simba was limping badly. His left side was matted with blood that had dried dark against his golden fur. His breathing seemed labored, like each breath took conscious effort. His normally confident stride had been replaced by a slow, careful walk that suggested every movement caused him pain. But, worst of all, was the look in his eyes. The confidence was gone. The arrogance had been replaced by something else, something that looked almost like defeat. Zara moved toward him quickly, her nose working to smell his injuries, her eyes scanning his body to assess the damage. The other lionesses followed, forming a circle around their king, their maternal instincts activated by the sight of an injured pride member. The cubs stopped their wrestling immediately, sensing that something serious had happened. Even young lions understood that an injured dominant male was a threat to the stability of the entire pride. Simba sank down onto the ground, his legs finally giving out now that he had reached safety. He didn't have to maintain his appearance of strength anymore. He didn't have to pretend that everything was fine. He was, in his pride, surrounded by females that had depended on him for protection and food. He could finally allow himself to show weakness. Zara began to lick his wounds, her rough tongue working across the deep gashes on his chest and side. The action, while painful, was also comforting. It was the way lions took care of each other. It was the way mothers healed their cubs, and the way pride members cared for the injured. The other lionesses settled around him, creating a protective circle with their bodies. If any other predator approached the grove right now, they would have to go through the entire pride to reach the injured male. Over the next few hours, as the sun finally disappeared below the horizon and darkness claimed the savannah, Simba told his story to the pride. He didn't speak in words, of course. Lions don't have a complex verbal language the way humans do, but he communicated through vocalizations, through body language, through the way he moved and reacted. The lionesses understood from his behavior that he had attempted to hunt a buffalo. They understood from his injuries that the buffalo had fought back. They understood from his overall demeanor that he had not succeeded. What surprised them most was that he had survived it all. A buffalo could kill a lion. It happened sometimes, though not often. Most lions learned early on to avoid adult buffalo unless they had no other choice, but Simba had always been different. Simba had always taken risks that other lions wouldn't take. Simba had always seemed invincible. Now they were seeing that invincibility was just an illusion. That night, Simba didn't eat. Even though the lionesses successfully hunted a zebra near the waterhole, even though fresh meat was available, the injured male refused to participate in the meal. His body needed the nutrition, needed the energy to heal, but his mind wasn't ready to accept help. His ego was still too wounded. He lay at the edge of the grove, watching the lionesses and cubs eat, watching his pride function without his direct participation. It was a strange feeling being on the outside of the pride dynamics. Normally, Simba would eat first, before the females, before the cubs. It was his right as the dominant male. It was the way lion society worked. The strongest ate first, the weakest ate last, if there was anything left. But tonight, watching the lionesses tear into the zebra carcass, watching the cubs fight over choice pieces of meat, Simba understood something that he had never really grasped before. The pride didn't exist because of him. The pride existed because they supported each other. The lionesses hunted to feed themselves and their cubs. Simba's job was to defend the territory and father new cubs. They were partners in survival, not slaves to his dominance. The realization was as painful as any of his physical injuries. Over the next few days, something interesting began to happen. The other males in the surrounding territories sensed that Simba was injured. They could smell it on the wind. They could see it in the way he moved when he ventured out of the grove. Word traveled through the animal communication network faster than any human could comprehend. Injured males meant opportunity. Vulnerable territories meant that they could be claimed. 3 rival males appeared at the border of Simba's territory on the 4th day after his encounter with the buffalo. They were young, probably around 8 or 9 years old, still in their prime, but not yet as massive or scarred as Simba. They roared challenges across the grassland, announcing their presence, declaring their intention to take over this territory if Simba was too weak to defend it. Under normal circumstances, Simba would have left the grove immediately. He would have met these challengers at the border and demonstrated why he was the king of this territory. He would have fought them, defeated them, and sent them running with their tails between their legs. But these were not normal circumstances. Simba was still too injured to fight. Moving too quickly caused sharp pain in his chest. His breathing was still labored. His strength hadn't returned. A serious fight right now could kill him, or at the very least, could result in him losing the territory that he had built over 8 years. The lionesses felt the tension immediately. They understood what was happening. They understood that their territory, their home, their source of food and safety, was being threatened. And they understood that their king was in no condition to defend it alone. So they did something unusual. They prepared to defend it themselves. The 4 primary lionesses of the pride, led by Zara, moved toward the border where the rival males were roaring. Cubs were left behind in the grove, protected by older females who were too old or too young to fight. The 4 fighting lionesses moved with purpose, with determination, with the knowledge that they were about to engage in something that could end badly for them. The rival males saw the lionesses approaching and seemed confused by the display. They had expected Simba to show up. They had expected a 1-on-1 or possibly a 3-on-1 confrontation with a damaged male. They had not expected to face 4 healthy lionesses who were ready to fight for their home. What happened at the border was a testament to the strength of the pride as a unit. The lionesses didn't fight like individual hunters. They fought like a coordinated team, each one understanding what the others were doing, each one covering the other's blind spots. When the largest rival male charged at Zara, the other 3 lionesses surrounded him, attacking from multiple angles. When another rival tried to escape, a lioness cut him off with surprising speed and agility. When it was over, the 3 rival males were retreating back toward their own territory, bleeding from multiple wounds, their confidence shattered. They had come expecting to claim an injured male's territory. Instead, they had encountered a pride that was willing to fight for what was theirs. Simba watched the entire confrontation from the edge of the grove. He was too injured to participate, but he wasn't useless. His presence, even injured, even weakened, still meant something. The rivals knew that if they had managed to defeat the lionesses, Simba would have been waiting for them, ready to defend the final line. The knowledge of his presence, even with his injuries, had helped the lionesses fight harder. When the lionesses returned to the grove, Simba rose to meet them. He touched his nose to each one, a gesture of respect and gratitude. The lionesses had defended the pride. The lionesses had proven that they were more than just hunters. They were warriors when they needed to be. Over the next 2 weeks, Simba's injuries slowly began to heal. The gashes on his chest formed scabs, and the scabs eventually fell away, revealing new skin underneath. His breathing became easier as his ribs healed. His strength gradually returned. But something fundamental had changed inside him. The arrogance was gone, replaced by a new understanding of what it meant to be a lion in the African wilderness. He began to hunt again, but differently than before. He started hunting with the lionesses instead of hunting alone. He began to take calculated risks instead of charging blindly into danger. He started to think about the pride as a unit instead of just as subjects that served his dominance. The buffalo had taught him a lesson that no amount of hunting success could have taught him. The buffalo had humbled him, and that humility made him a better king. One afternoon, about 3 weeks after his encounter with the buffalo, Simba decided to return to the watering hole where the confrontation had taken place. His injuries were mostly healed by now. The scars would remain for the rest of his life, visible reminders of the day that his confidence had nearly gotten him killed. But he was curious. He wanted to know if the buffalo was still in the area. When he arrived at the watering hole, he found the buffalo. The animal was standing in the shade of a large tree, its injured leg still showing signs of damage, but clearly healed enough for the buffalo to function. The two animals locked eyes across the distance. They didn't charge at each other. They didn't posture or roar or make aggressive displays. They simply looked at each other, two predators who had fought and both had walked away. Simba understood something in that moment. The buffalo hadn't been easy prey. The buffalo had been exactly what it appeared to be, a wounded animal fighting for survival. And that wounded animal had proven to be more dangerous than any healthy buffalo could have been, because wounded animals fight harder. Because desperate creatures are willing to do things that healthy, confident creatures would never attempt. The lion turned around and walked away from the watering hole. He left the buffalo undisturbed. Some lessons were worth more than any meal. Some enemies were worth respecting rather than fighting. Simba had learned that the hard way, carved into his chest and burned into his memory. That night, when he returned to the pride, Simba settled down beside Zara and the other lionesses. He rested his head on his paws, watching the cubs play in the fading light. His chest hurt when he breathed deeply, but it was a good kind of hurt. It was the hurt of healing. It was the hurt of learning. The king of the savannah had been defeated by a buffalo, but that defeat had made him stronger, wiser, and more aware of his place in the complex ecosystem of the African wilderness. He would hunt buffalo again. He would take down massive prey, but he would never again charge blindly into danger with the assumption that his strength was enough to overcome anything. The buffalo had shattered his plan, and in doing so, had made him understand what it really meant to be a true king. Months passed. The dry season came to the Serengeti, turning the grasslands from gold to brown. Water sources dried up, forcing animals to gather around the few remaining watering holes. This concentration of prey should have been a time of abundance for Simba, a time when hunting became easier because everything came to him. But the lion had learned that easy hunting often came with hidden dangers. The pride was thriving. The lionesses had given birth to 2 new litters, and the cubs born before Simba's encounter with the buffalo were growing rapidly, learning to hunt, learning to fight, learning the rules of survival in one of Africa's harshest environments. Simba watched them with pride, but also with patience. He no longer pushed them to hunt dangerous prey before they were ready. He no longer assumed that size and strength were enough to overcome any obstacle. One morning, as the pride was preparing for a hunt near the dried riverbed, Zara approached Simba. The old lioness had been watching the younger cubs play, and she had noticed something. One of the young males, barely 2 years old, had the same reckless confidence that Simba had possessed before his encounter with the buffalo. The cub was trying to stalk and attack much larger animals, convinced that his speed and courage were enough to overcome any prey. Zara looked at Simba with an expression that seemed to say, "He's like you were. Are you going to let him make the same mistakes?" Simba understood immediately what she was asking. The young male was his son, one of the cubs from a lioness named Amara. The cub had inherited his father's size, his father's confidence, and unfortunately, his father's tendency toward arrogance. Without guidance, without learning the hard lessons that Simba had learned, the young male would eventually meet his own buffalo. He would eventually encounter prey that fought back harder than expected. This time, Simba's response was different than it would have been months earlier. Instead of immediately rising to meet the challenge, he took a moment to assess his own condition. His injuries had healed completely, but they had left him slightly slower than before. His chest wasn't quite as flexible. His breathing wasn't quite as effortless. Age was beginning to creep in at the edges, something that no amount of hunting or fighting could completely prevent. The rival males were probably younger, probably faster, probably more dangerous than they had been when Simba was in his absolute prime. But Simba had something they didn't have. He had experience, he had knowledge, he understood the territory better than they ever could. He understood how to use intelligence and strategy to overcome raw youth and speed. Simba rose to his feet and roared his own challenge back across the savannah. The sound was deep and resonant, a sound that carried years of dominance, years of successful hunts, years of defending territory. It was the roar of a king who was not about to surrender his kingdom without a fight. The rival males appeared at the border within the hour. 4 of them, just as Simba had suspected, they were impressive specimens, probably between 6 and 8 years old, all of them in their prime physical condition. Their manes were full and dark, their bodies were muscular and powerful. They looked at Simba with the kind of confidence that only young, successful males possess. They believed they could take him. They believed that age and experience couldn't stand against youth and raw power. Simba let them believe that for exactly 3 seconds. When he charged with the knowledge of exactly where his weak points were. He charged with an understanding of what these young males would expect and how to do something different. He used the terrain, driving them toward rocky outcrops where their size would be a disadvantage. He used his knowledge of fighting, understanding that youth tends toward aggression, while experience understands when to hold back and let the opponent make a mistake. The fight lasted longer than Simba had expected. These weren't inexperienced males. These were serious challengers who had probably won several fights of their own. But they had never fought someone like Simba. They had never fought a male who had learned his lessons the hard way, who had been humbled by prey and had come back stronger. That afternoon, Simba began teaching his son in a way that no lion had taught him. He didn't just show the young male how to hunt. He showed him the dangers. He showed him which prey was worth the risk and which prey should be avoided. He told the story of the buffalo, not with words, but through demonstration and experience. They hunted zebra together, and Simba showed his son the proper angle of attack. They stalked wildebeest, and Simba demonstrated how to read an animal's body language to determine if it was healthy or injured, strong or weak. And when they encountered a herd of buffalo near the watering hole, Simba did something that surprised his son. He led the young male away from the buffalo instead of toward them. The cub, confused and frustrated by this decision, roared a protest. He wanted to hunt. He wanted to prove his strength. He wanted to take down a massive buffalo and return to the pride as a successful hunter. Simba silenced his son's roar with a single growl. Then he touched his chest, where the scars from the buffalo encounter were still visible. The message was clear. This was what happened when you underestimated prey. This was the price of arrogance. The young male seemed to understand. He looked at his father's scars, and something shifted in his expression. The blind confidence wavered for just a moment, replaced by a flicker of respect and caution. Over the next several months, Simba made a conscious effort to mentor all of the young males in his pride. He showed them how to hunt successfully without taking unnecessary risks. He taught them about reading territory, about understanding wind and weather, about the subtle signs that separated a good hunting opportunity from a death trap. The other lionesses noticed the change in Simba's behavior, and they approved. A king who cared about the next generation was a king who ensured the survival of his bloodline. But not everything went smoothly. One afternoon, while Simba was resting in the shade with several of the older lionesses, he heard roaring from the border of his territory. The roaring was deep and aggressive, the kind of roaring that signaled challenge rather than simple territorial announcement. Simba's muscles tensed immediately. His ears swiveled toward the sound, trying to determine how many males were making the challenge. At least 3, maybe 4. Young males, based on the pitch of their roars, but definitely serious about claiming his territory. By the time the confrontation ended, 2 of the rival males were retreating with serious injuries. The other 2 stood their ground, but they had clearly understood that they were outmatched. Simba didn't try to drive them completely away. Instead, he allowed them to retreat with some dignity intact. He had already won. There was no reason to completely destroy these young males. Mercy, he had learned, was sometimes more powerful than brutality. As the rival males disappeared back toward their own territory, Simba felt something he hadn't felt in a long time. Not triumph exactly, but satisfaction. He had defended his territory not through blind aggression, but through intelligence and strategy. He had proven that experience could overcome youth. He had shown his pride that even if his body wasn't quite what it had been, his mind was sharper than ever. That evening, the lionesses greeted him with respect that seemed deeper than it had been before. They had watched the confrontation from a distance. They had seen him defend his territory. They had witnessed him prove that he was still their king, not through brute strength alone, but through the kind of dominance that came from understanding how to survive and win in the African wilderness. The young male, Simba's son, watched the entire fight from his hiding spot in the tall grass. He watched his father move with precision and intelligence. He watched his father use strategy instead of just charging blindly into battle. And when his father returned to the pride, victorious but not arrogant, the young male understood something important. This was what being a true king meant. It wasn't just about being the strongest. It was about being the smartest, the most patient, the most aware of the dangers and how to overcome them. As the seasons continued to pass, Simba's legend grew in a different way than it had before his encounter with the buffalo. Other lions began to speak of him not just as the strongest predator in the territory, but as the wisest. Young males from other prides would sometimes try to challenge him, hoping to prove themselves, but most backed away when they realized who they were facing. The reputation of Simba had become something that preceded him, something that made other males think twice before engaging. But Simba no longer saw that limp as a weakness. He saw it as a badge of honor. He saw it as proof that he had survived something that could have killed him. He saw it as the physical manifestation of the wisdom that had come from that encounter. By the time Simba reached the grove, darkness had completely claimed the savannah. The lionesses were settling in for the night, and the cubs were curling up against their mothers for warmth and security. Simba took his place among them, his massive body a source of comfort and protection. He would sleep well tonight. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities, new moments where he would have to decide whether to charge blindly forward or to think carefully about his actions. The years of dominance that remained to him would be different from the years that had come before. They would be better. They would be wiser. The buffalo had shattered his plan, but in doing so, it had given him something far more valuable than any successful hunt. It had given him perspective. It had given him humility. It had taught him that being the strongest doesn't mean you always win, and that sometimes the greatest victories come not from defeating your enemies, but from understanding them. As Simba closed his eyes and drifted toward sleep, he understood something fundamental about his place in the African wilderness. He wasn't just a predator. He wasn't just a king. He was a teacher, a mentor, a father, and a survivor. He had been tested by prey that refused to die easily, and he had come out of that test forever changed. And that change was the real victory. Not the kill, not the conquest, but the wisdom that came from being challenged and learning from the experience. That was what would ensure his legacy. That was what would keep the pride strong after he was gone. That was what made him a true king of the Serengeti. But Simba himself understood that all things eventually come to an end. He could feel it in his body, the gradual slowing, the way his muscles didn't respond quite as quickly as they had when he was younger. He could see it in the way the young males were growing stronger and more confident. One day, probably within the next few years, a challenger would come along, who was young enough and strong enough to defeat him. That was the natural order. That was how nature worked. Instead of fearing this inevitable outcome, Simba began to prepare for it. He made sure that his sons understood the territory as well as he did. He made sure that the lionesses were strong and capable of surviving without him if necessary. He did everything he could to ensure that the pride would thrive even after he was no longer the dominant male. One afternoon, nearly a year after his encounter with the buffalo, Simba returned to the watering hole one more time. The buffalo was no longer there. It had probably moved on, probably was living its life in some other part of the savannah, carrying its own scars from their confrontation. But Simba found himself thinking about the animal often, thinking about what it had taught him, thinking about how a single moment of confrontation had changed his entire understanding of what it meant to be a predator. He lay down at the edge of the water and drank deeply. The water was cool and clean. When two powerful animals had collided and both had walked away, changed. Simba thought about all the things that had happened since that day. The new cubs, born to the pride, the rival males he had defeated, the lessons he had taught to his son, the understanding that had come with his injuries. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and red. Simba rose to his feet and turned back toward the grove, where his pride was waiting. His body moved differently now than it had a year ago. There was a slight limp still, barely noticeable, but always there. A permanent reminder of the day that his confidence had been shattered. The night settled in around the pride, warm and protective. In the distance, hyenas laughed their eerie calls. Somewhere far away, another lion roared, announcing its presence to rivals and prey alike. But here in this grove, surrounded by lionesses and cubs, Simba rested, his body healed from the encounter, his mind enriched by the experience, his spirit strengthened by the understanding that survival in the African wilderness wasn't just about strength, it was about wisdom, it was about learning, it was about understanding when to fight and when to walk away. It was about respecting your enemies and honoring those who challenged you, because those challenges were what made you stronger, better, and ultimately a true survivor. The buffalo that had shattered Simba's plan had also created a better king, and that was a transformation worth far more than any successful hunt could ever be.